Every file has a story. Some were never meant to be found. On Christmas Eve, in 1945, the Sodder family gathered inside their home in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. It was a night like countless others. Christmas presents had been opened. The younger children laughed together. Neighbors exchanged holiday greetings. And the Sodder family prepared to end the evening like any other Christmas. No one inside that house could have imagined that before sunrise, 5 of the Sodder children would vanish forever. Their names were Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. For nearly 80 years, their disappearance has remained one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Because despite an intense house fire that destroyed almost everything, investigators discovered something impossible. No human remains belonging to the 5 missing children were ever found. Not a single bone, not a single tooth, not a single confirmed trace. Only questions. Questions that continue to haunt investigators, historians, and the Sodder family to this very day. George Sodder had immigrated to the United States from Italy as a young man. He built a successful trucking business, raised a large family, and became a respected member of the Fayetteville community. His wife, Jenny, managed the busy household where 10 children filled the home with constant activity. Friends described the Sodders as hard-working, close-knit, and devoted to one another. Yet George was also known for something else. He spoke openly against Benito Mussolini and against Italy's fascist government. His political opinions often led to heated arguments with other Italian immigrants living nearby. At the time, few people considered those disagreements important. Years later, some investigators wondered whether they should have. The Sodder home stood on a hillside overlooking Fayetteville. It was a large wooden house filled with the sounds of children, laughter, and constant movement. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, had been filled with excitement. Several of the younger children begged their parents to stay awake a little longer and play with their new toys. George and Jenny finally agreed. Around 10 p.m., they went upstairs to bed, leaving some of the older children responsible for locking the doors and turning off the lights downstairs. Everything appeared perfectly normal. It would be the last peaceful moment the family would ever experience. Around 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jenny answered. On the other end, an unfamiliar woman asked for someone the family did not know. Loud laughter echoed in the background, along with the sound of glasses clinking. Jenny assumed it was simply a wrong number. She hung up and returned to bed. Before falling asleep, she noticed something unusual. The lights downstairs were still on. The curtains remained open. Several of the younger children were asleep in the living room. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and turned upstairs. A short time later, another strange sound woke her. It was loud, a heavy thud striking the roof, followed by what she later described as a rolling noise. The sound lasted only a few seconds. Then, everything became silent again. Jenny eventually fell back asleep. She never imagined that those sounds would become some of the most debated clues in the entire case. At approximately 1 a.m., she awoke once more. This time, the smell of smoke filled the house. When she opened her bedroom door, she saw flames already climbing the staircase. Within moments, The fire spread rapidly through the wooden home. George Sodder rushed downstairs, desperately trying to reach his children. Jenny screamed for everyone to get outside. Chaos filled the house. The oldest sons, John and George Jr., managed to escape through the front door. Jenny escaped carrying one of the youngest children. Several others followed. But when the family counted everyone outside, 5 children were missing: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. They were believed to still be trapped upstairs. George refused to accept it. Ignoring the flames, he attempted to force his way back into the burning house. The heat drove him back. Again and again, he searched desperately for another way inside, but every second, the fire grew stronger. George's first instinct was to use the ladder kept beside the house. It was the fastest way to reach the upstairs windows. But when he ran toward its usual location, the ladder was gone. Someone, or something, had moved it. With no time to search, George rushed to his coal truck. His plan was simple: drive the truck beneath the second-floor window, climb onto its roof, and rescue the children himself. He jumped inside, turned the key. Nothing. The engine would not start. Moments later, he tried the second truck. It had been working perfectly the previous day. It also refused to start. 2 trucks, both suddenly inoperable at the exact moment they were needed most. The fire continued to spread. Neighbors gathered outside, watching helplessly as flames consumed the house. Someone attempted to call the Fayetteville Fire Department. The telephone operator received the message, but for reasons that remain unclear, the alarm was never properly transmitted. Another resident drove into town personally, searching for firefighters. The nearest volunteer fire department eventually responded, but valuable time had already been lost. By the time firefighters arrived, the house had collapsed into burning rubble. Everything appeared to be over. The official conclusion seemed obvious. 5 children had died in the fire. But George Sodder refused to believe it. Not because he could not accept the loss, but because what he saw simply made no sense. Experienced firefighters told him that house fires intense enough to destroy human bodies still leave bones behind, especially spinal fragments, teeth, or parts of the skull. Yet when investigators searched the ashes, they found none, absolutely nothing that could be identified as belonging to the missing children. The official report claimed the fire had burned so intensely that the bodies were completely consumed. George immediately challenged that explanation. He had watched machinery, animal bones, and household objects survive fires far hotter than the one that destroyed his home. How, he asked, could 5 entire bodies disappear without leaving a single trace? George believed the investigation had ended far too quickly. Only days after the fire, workers began clearing the ruins. Without a complete forensic examination, important evidence may have been destroyed forever. Then, more strange details began to emerge. A telephone repairman later inspected the family's phone line. His conclusion surprised everyone. The fire had not burned through the telephone wire. Instead, the line had been deliberately cut. Someone had climbed the utility pole, separated the cable, and left it hanging. If that was true, who had done it, and why? The missing ladder also reappeared, not beside the house, but lying in a nearby embankment, far from where George always kept it. Investigators never determined how it got there. The 2 coal trucks, which had refused to start during the fire, were later examined.
Mechanics found nothing seriously wrong. Both vehicles started normally afterward. George became convinced that someone had planned the entire event. Then another witness came forward. A local bus driver reported seeing several people watching the Sodder house before the fire began. Another woman claimed she saw the missing children looking out from a passing vehicle while the fire was still burning. She believed they appeared frightened. Years later, a waitress at a roadside restaurant made another remarkable statement. She claimed 5 unfamiliar children had stopped there with 2 adults shortly after Christmas. When she attempted to speak with them, one of the adults warned her not to interfere. Police were unable to verify the account, but it added yet another mystery to an already impossible case. The reports kept coming, each one raising more questions than answers. Then, George Sodder remembered something else. Months before the fire, a man selling life insurance had visited his home. George declined the offer. The salesman became angry. According to George, the man pointed toward the house and said, "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." At the time, George dismissed it as an emotional outburst. After the fire, those words became impossible to forget. Years passed, but George Sodder never stopped searching. He refused to accept the official explanation. Convinced that his children had survived, he launched one of the most extraordinary private investigations in American history. The Sodder family erected a massive billboard along Route 16. Printed across it were the faces of the 5 missing children. Beneath the photographs, George offered a substantial reward. First $5,000, then $10,000, eventually increasing the amount even further. Anyone who could provide reliable information was asked to come forward. For decades, travelers passing through Fayetteville saw the enormous sign. Its weathered photographs became one of West Virginia's most recognizable landmarks. The family followed every lead, no matter how unlikely it seemed. Then, in 1949, George hired an independent pathologist. Together, they requested permission to conduct another search of the property. Excavations uncovered several small bone fragments. At first, it appeared the mystery had finally been solved. The fragments were sent for examination. The results only deepened the mystery. Experts concluded the bones did not belong to the missing children. Some were determined to be animal remains. Others appeared to have been present long before the fire. Even more surprising, laboratory analysis suggested the fragments had not been exposed to the intense heat expected from the house fire. Once again, the evidence refused to support the official conclusion. Years continued to pass. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, an envelope arrived at the Sodder family home. There was no return address. Inside, they found a single photograph. It showed a young man, approximately in his 20s. On the back, someone had written a short message. Louis Sodder, along with several numbers and letters whose meaning has never been deciphered. The man in the photograph bore a remarkable resemblance to Louis Sodder, one of the missing children. George and Jenny were overwhelmed. Could this finally be proof that at least one of their children had survived? George immediately hired a private investigator. His only assignment: find the young man in the photograph. The investigator traveled to Kentucky, where the photograph had been mailed. Then, without warning, he disappeared. No report was ever delivered.
No explanation was ever given. The Sodder family never heard from him again. The photograph remained one more unanswered question. Over the following decades, theories multiplied. Some believed the children had been kidnapped before the fire. Others suspected organized crime. George himself wondered whether his outspoken criticism of Benito Mussolini had made powerful enemies years earlier. Another theory suggested the fire had been deliberately set to cover the abduction. Supporters pointed to the cut telephone line, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, and the repeated eyewitness reports claiming the children were seen alive after Christmas Eve. Skeptics remained unconvinced. No verified document, no DNA evidence, and no confirmed witness ever proved that the 5 children survived. Yet the official explanation also failed to answer every question. How could 5 bodies disappear completely when investigators recovered virtually no human remains? Why was the telephone line cut? Who moved the ladder? Why did both trucks suddenly fail? And who sent the mysterious photograph more than 20 years later? One mystery continued to haunt the family above all others. If the children had died in the fire, why did so many independent witnesses claim to have seen them afterward? Some accounts placed them in nearby towns. Others claimed they were traveling with unfamiliar adults. None of those reports could ever be confirmed, but neither could they be completely dismissed. As George and Jenny grew older, they never stopped believing. The billboard remained standing for years, serving not only as a plea for information, but as a promise. They would never abandon the search for their children. Even after George passed away, other members of the Sodder family continued investigating the case. Generations inherited boxes filled with newspaper clippings, police reports, photographs, and handwritten notes. The mystery became part of the family's identity, passed from parents to children for nearly 80 years. The Sodder children mystery remains one of the most debated cold cases in American history. Not because investigators found too little evidence, but because every piece of evidence seemed to contradict another. A house consumed by fire, yet no confirmed remains. A telephone line deliberately cut. A ladder moved from its usual place. 2 trucks that refused to start, only to work perfectly afterward. Eyewitnesses who claimed the children survived. A mysterious photograph arriving more than 20 years later. And a family that never stopped believing. Even today, no single theory explains every detail. If the children died in the fire, where were their remains? If they survived, who took them? Why were they never positively identified? Who sent the photograph marked Louis Sodder? And what became of the other 4 children? Some researchers believe the truth disappeared with the passing of time. Others argue that important evidence was overlooked during the first days of the investigation. Modern forensic science, including DNA analysis, could potentially answer questions that investigators in 1945 never had the ability to solve. But many of the original pieces of evidence no longer exist. As the years passed, witnesses died, memories faded, documents disappeared. And with every passing decade, the possibility of finding definitive answers became smaller. Yet, the mystery refuses to disappear. New documentaries, books, podcasts, and independent investigators continue examining the case. Every few years, someone uncovers an old newspaper, a forgotten interview, or a previously overlooked document. Hope briefly returns. Then, the trail grows cold once again. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the Sodder children died that Christmas Eve, but whether the truth was lost long before investigators ever arrived. Until new evidence is discovered, the burned Sodder house, the missing 5 children, and the unanswered questions surrounding that Christmas night will continue to haunt historians, investigators, and everyone who studies America's greatest unsolved disappearances. For now, this file remains open.